Welcome inside of my MMA crazed mind. This is Caged Minds Uncensored. I'm your host, Micah Frankel. A shout out to Edwin Ruiz, Mac10, that's MMA CK10, supporting combat sports athletes everywhere. Check them out on Facebook. They also have the I Got Your Back anti-bullying campaign. So let's go. Let's talk about some MMA. We'll start out with CES 48 from Friday night. It was on Access TV, took place at the Twin River Casino in Lincoln, Rhode Island. The main event lasted just 23 seconds. Heavyweight title fight. Travis Hume, the wrestler, with a 90-plus fight record, shoots in for his takedown, trying to get Greg Rubello to the ground. Rubello with some devastating uppercuts from his sprawl. Couple hard hammer fists to the ear. Hume goes out. Rubello has rebounded nicely from his loss at Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series. He's now won 4 or 5. The last two, both TKOs, in a combined minute and 46 seconds. Highlight of CES, a big win. Rubello obviously has been in the mindset and the thought process of wanting to take the next step in his career, and that he believes it's the UFC. Be interesting if the Pro Fighters League, with their tournament coming up, or even Bellator, that's been making a run at making a deeper heavyweight division, pick up on Rubello, or if we do see him make it to the octagon. Talking about the UFC, no lack of drama ever with what's going on with the UFC. Injury has struck once again, and it couldn't have came to a worse event. UFC 222 was not the most stacked pay-per-view card, and now with an undisclosed leg injury, featherweight champion Max Holloway has had to pull out of his fight with Frankie Edgar. Such a shame. It was Edgar at UFC 218 who had to pull out of the fight with a orbital socket injury. That fight, you moved Jose Aldo up to the main event, who ended up losing for the second time by third round TKO to Holloway. You don't have that automatic replacement, though, as we had back in Detroit. A thought would be a number one contenders bout. You could make Edgar versus Ortega, Brian Ortega, Frankie Edgar be a great fight. It would be a fun fight. You could make that a 5-round fight, and it'd be very entertaining if it was a fight night event. But the UFC is not into canceling pay-per-views. They're not into losing money. They want a main event. Well, lo and behold, rumors of what could be a possibility for the UFC 222 main event started to trickle out. What about a bantamweight title rematch? TJ Dillashaw versus Cody Garbrandt. Well, one, that would be a little short-sighted for both guys' camp, as out of nowhere to throw together a title fight on 4 weeks' notice. Another problem, just a little problem, is that the last time we were talking about TJ Dillashaw, Dana White was incredibly adamant that DJ versus TJ, the super fight, would be the attentions and focus of the UFC and the matchmaking, in what direction they wanted to take those two men's career. Well, what could have changed? Very reactionary ownership that needs a main event because of an injury. Well, then you say, well, maybe I'll listen to the theory if you're TJ. They're giving you a call, why not listen? Well, TJ, we want you to rematch Cody. You mean the guy I just beat? Yeah. Really, why would I rematch him? Oh, because they gave you a rematch right away when you lost a split decision. Nope. This is where it gets fun. TJ Dillashaw had a fight for 2 years after losing his title by split decision to Dominic Cruz. Did not get an immediate rematch, even when members of the UFC brass in the back told Dillashaw that they felt he beat Cruz. Cruz later gets dethroned by Garbrandt. Garbrandt suffers injuries. TJ Dillashaw and Garbrandt go through the whole tough saga, so they gave their personal hype to the UFC, to FS1. They were the company man. They went through that hoopla of the ratings and the TV and the drama to get to Fight Night. A crazy fight that was fun, Dillashaw, by stoppage, walks away victorious. Now you're going to turn around to a guy that won by stoppage and ask him to give that guy he defeated by stoppage again a rematch when you wouldn't give him a rematch when he lost by split decision and you felt he won? And let's not forget to throw out the 4 weeks notice to make this fight. I can't help but agree with TJ Dillashaw in this manner. Oh, not to mention again, are you still talking about the same kind of payday to rematch Garbrandt that you were to have the super fight with Johnson? Because you can't offer me the Demetrius Johnson super fight that you guys were so dead set on must happen, and then retract that to on short notice make me defend my title and possibly lose that huge payday. There's not a company man enough line that you could give anybody to con them into doing that move unless you gave Dillashaw a staggering amount of money, and I'm talking probably something like $10 million, if not more. That's the kind of numbers I believe you'd have to be throwing out there to make somebody put a huge payday, to put being a 2-division champion on the line just because you didn't stack the card enough at UFC 222 to make it a viable pay-per-view. The UFC is left scrambling because of lackluster matchmaking at the moment, taking a shot at those guys. But this is the one time where oversaturation may be hurting as you're spreading yourselves too thin when the majority of the public is looking at the fight card and going, could this be the one that maybe we don't watch? Could this be the one that's not grabbing everybody's attention? It's not the must-see event, but you want it to be the must-see event because you're the UFC and you're doing these pay-per-views so frequently. Right now, Stefan Struve, Andre Arlovski coming off of losses. Same thing with Hector Lombard, CB Dollaway. The return of Kat Zingano after so many years, it's not compelling enough, and the UFC needs something compelling. Will they be able to get it? I'm not so sure. The best idea at the moment looks to be an Edgar Ortega matchup, and again, that relegates this fight card to a fight night. Other crazy ideas being thrown out there. Who else is an attention-grabbing headline maker? Nate Diaz you could throw out there. But on 4 weeks' notice, again, it's really short notice to make the fight, and you'd have to be looking at the welterweight division for Diaz to come back to in this kind of notice. I don't know if Colby Covington, if Rafael Dos Anjos are in training. 4 weeks' notice. I believe the smartest move and the most logical move that must be made is turning UFC 222 into a UFC Fight Night special card. UFC 222, I guess it'll go down as a lost pay-per-view because we know renaming rights for 223, which is looking to be a stat card, would just be too much. The UFC, I believe also, they need to do less fight cards. We're talking about the oversaturation. Maybe less fight cards with more fights per card wouldn't leave you in such peril of needing main eventers. If you're able to put 2 or 3 main event worthy high level fights at the top of a pay-per-view card, 2 title fights, number 1 contender fights, you're able to soften the blow of these inevitable injuries. The most dangerous part about combat sports is training for the combat sports. Dudes get banged up left, right, all the time. I think the UFC needs to logically approach this in a way that they can stack up the cards and be ready for these kind of losses, because in the era of stacking up all these super fights is another problem limiting the main event caliber talent. When you want to do TJ DJ, you want to do DC Miocic, you want to do Amanda Nunes Cyborg, you're taking away half your champions, putting them against each other, and then relegating everyone else to have to pull a bigger load as you're forcing a Max Holloway to have opponent changes, have back-to-back camps on short notice to make up for the shortcomings of what the UFC is doing. As we continue to complain about the UFC, it seems like we could go on to talk about the price hike. That is another problem. The UFC and the pay-per-view companies have again raised the prices. I believe we're looking at $65 per event, and it's just getting up there in a ridiculous number when you think that we're not getting better cards, as we're complaining about how lackluster UFC 222 is looking. When you looked at 217, 3 title fights, that was acceptable. Some of these cards have been huge, but some of them are falling to par. The UFC has got to be able to stabilize to where pay-per-view cards are having 6 fights, 2 title fights. And again, let's put maybe, instead of 12 fights on a card, 15 fights on a card. Let's utilize Fight Pass a little bit more. And then you have these extra fights in case fights fall off. Just my opinion. Because a card like UFC Fight Night 125, the organization's first trip to Brazil this year, it was a little up and down due to uncontrollable circumstances. Another one of the biggest problems in MMA reared its ugly head this weekend. What are we talking about? Weight cutting. You could not foresee in Brazil the hotel having problems with hot water, 3 fighters missing weight, thankfully, because he was in the main event. And with that hotel problem, Eric Anders does make weight after getting an extra hour, made weight for the main event. But Pedro Munoz misses weight by 4 pounds for his expected co-main event bout with John Dodson. And the featured main card bout in the lightweight division between Michel Pereira and Des Green, you saw Pereira miss weight by 5 pounds, and that's after the pound allowance. 3 guys miss weight. It's another one of those hard, ugly problems. Thankfully, Anders makes weight, and we lead into another problem. Well, what do you do when the guys miss weight? The UFC had offered Dodson, I believe, 20% of Munoz's check to be that company man, to take the pat on the back and the thumbs up, and to accept the fight. Dodson had been in that position once before, took the fight with John Lineker when Lineker missed weight, suffered a split decision loss, thinks better of it this time. The co-main event is canceled. Thankfully, you have Valentina Shevchenko on the card, so she's elevated. So you don't lose out, thankfully, because they did a nice job of stacking this fight night in Brazil, with still having a headlining big-name fighter in the co-main event. Pereira misses weight by 5 pounds. Des Green does the company man little deal, shtick, went to Brazil to fight, and accepts the fight. What he really did is accepted to get paid, because the UFC does not pay John Dodson for not accepting the fight with Pedro Munoz. Reportedly, that fight is in the works of being rescheduled for UFC 223, so they will fight. Reebok did pay Dodson for being down there in Brazil. So you look at, both fighters had the option to accept their fight or not. Dodson, because of a prior bad experience, did not. Des Green uses the company man line, but I really believe he did it just to get paid. One, this shines light on the fact that you always hear the key phrase thrown out there in combat sports, your show money and your winner's purse. Well, show money kind of makes it sound like he showed up, he did his media obligations, his open workouts, he was on time to everything, and he made weight. He gets his show money. So that would lead you to think, because he showed up for all those things, and his opponent, something he can't control, misses weight, you are then there given the option to accept the fight or not. So the most logical people, because you've lived up to all of your obligations, you would then be inclined to believe you would get paid for still living up to all your obligations. Because that's your show money, and you showed up. But that is categorically incorrect. Show money is the nice term, and I don't know if it's actually labeled this way in the contract, but it should be, of the loser side of what you're getting paid. Because the win bonus, yes, it does double from your show money, but it's really that you showed up in the cage on fight night. It's not money for showing up at the weigh-ins, cutting weight, being professional, doing media, living up to your other obligations that the promotion has set upon you. It is showing up in the cage money and fighting. How else could you describe what's happened to John Dodson? Vitor Belfort. Belfort loses an opponent fight week, doesn't accept a replacement. The UFC says they're not going to pay him because they gave him the opportunity to fight somebody else. How can it be the fighter's obligation to accept whatever fight is handed to them when they spent their time training for a specific opponent? I understand there's a warrior mentality that you need to just jump in there and prove what kind of fighter you are. You hear the company throw out those kind of things all the time because the company doesn't show the bravery in paying for the fighter's hard work. They just know that they can exploit them in the cage, and that's where their money comes in. They're using that adrenaline and that want to compete, that desire to compete that these fighters have, and that's why their fighters trying to use that against them. Oh, they didn't want to fight, so they're not getting paid. Well, their opponent didn't live up to the obligations. Their opponent couldn't make it into the cage that night. Why is it my obligation, when I did everything I said I would do, to take whatever you're handing me at the last moment? And again, when it's a company that's reporting that they made $623 million profit last year and actually set a record for profit and just built a performance institute, want to build another building, to hear them say, oh no, we can't pay you your show money, it's a really crappy shit thing to do from the world's leader in the sport, to not pay a guy because your opponent didn't make weight and now you didn't take the fight. How could you? He didn't live up to his obligations. How could you not just blindly accept this fight, giving him an extra advantage? So we had fireworks and controversy even before UFC Fight Night 125 got started in Brazil. And as they love to categorize these events, it's UFC Fight Night in Brazil, so it's Brazil against the world. That's what the matchmaking does. Like any promotion, they matchmake to put the local talent on top because, number one, you're trying to get the butts in the seats and then the eyes on the TV. So the butts in the seats, you need the local area or national names that those people care about. And then for the TV ratings, you have the big names. A former champion in Machida. You had Shevchenko, who some people believe should be the women's bantamweight champion. You had two-time title challenger John Dodson expected to be on the card. Sounds like a stellar card. It almost makes you wonder where the UFC's focus is. Real quick, got to get to this point. Where is the UFC's focus? This was an international fight night card on FS1. To most of us here in America, the cards on FS1, those fight nights, are not as prominently looked at as, say, ones that are held on Fox, or at least that's what the TV deal that they signed led us to believe, that the Fox events were supposed to be marquee. Well, you think about the Derek Brunson Jacare card versus this card, and with those names I laid out at the top, Machida, Dodson, and Shevchenko, this card looked more prominent. Then you look back at, well, geographically, was the card in Charlotte, North Carolina not as heavily stacked as the card in Brazil, thinking that they may lead you to believe the UFC is more internationally concerned than they are concerned with what they're doing here in the United States. An interesting point just to bring up. More interesting points to bring up about this card is I think they missed the mark. And in the mark, in something that Dana White even told us. Dana White has told us that you fight, you get on a win streak so that you can get ranked. You make your way up the rankings to get to the top of the rankings, to main event fight nights, to main event cards, to become a star, to earn your way to a title fight. Well, then it seems a little strange to me that you would have most of the fighters on the FS1 prelims unranked, a couple matchups of fighters on the main card unranked, when number 14 ranked flyweight Davidson Figueroa was deemed down to the fight pass prelim, the singular fight pass prelim, losing the Dodson Munoz fight up at the top. I thought it gave a great opportunity then to put that number 14 ranked flyweight, a guy then that is on the cusp of superstardom, as the UFC would put it, because their contender rankings matter. You would put him on the main card, and possibly a Michel Pereira, yes, on a 6-fight win streak, but with incredible problems making weight. Maybe you would relegate him further down the card. Maybe a Douglas de Andrade, who's coming off of a loss, and a Marlon Vera, who was in the same circumstances, they're coming off of losses, maybe they could be relegated further down the card. And a guy like Figueroa, who wins with the second round TKO and is trying to make a name for himself in that flyweight division, could get the recognition because he's a ranked fighter. Be in the same position that Thiago Santos and Timothy Johnson were in, because they have numbers next to their names. So I thought it was a little strange that Figueroa was put so far down on the card, having to look up at unranked fighters for the next 3 fights. But it was Brazil against the world, and it almost felt like that. Find out later, and it had to be mentioned on social media because of controversial decisions, that the judges were Americans, that the UFC was in control of this event. But the UFC was not in control of the referees, and definitely not happy with them. Some people think the worst moment of the night was the beating that Valentina Shevchenko gave to Priscilla Cabrera. A bad moment. Cabrera finally gets submitted by Shevchenko in the latter part of the second round. Shevchenko stunned Priscilla early on the feet in the first round. Priscilla, with an awkward step, blew out her knee early in the fight, but was able to keep standing until she got taken down and just got bludgeoned on the ground for the better part of 2 rounds before she gave up the rear naked choke to Shevchenko. A lot of people felt that that was the most heinous act by the referee. The strike count officially 200-3. Mario Yamasaki justified himself later by saying every time he would tell Priscilla to move or I'm going to stop the fight, she would keep moving. And even though she was getting wailed on, she kept active enough on her hips, kept squirming and scrambling, that there never felt like that just gave up moment where she was getting pounded unmercifully and you had to stop the fight. She got pounded and forced into the submission. A big win for Shevchenko, who the whole internet and the world is presuming will be the next title challenger, the first title challenger for Nico Montano when she does defend the title, as we know that Montano is recovering from some injuries. Referee Mario Yamasaki has been called out by Dana White. Dana White and the UFC will work in efforts towards never allowing Yamasaki to officiate their fights again. He has been questioned for many years about late stoppages. Some fighters love that. Some fighters want to be pounded into burger and be given every opportunity for that heroic comeback. But when fighter safety is prevalent, a referee like Yamasaki cannot be in control of fighters. He cannot be overseeing a contest that could determine somebody's life. This is a dangerous sport, and you cannot have somebody who's so just reckless at the helm controlling a fight. People would say that that was the most heinous action of Yamasaki's night, was the late stoppage against Shevchenko. But I will go back much earlier on the card to the FS1 prelims, where Alan Patrick is on top of Damir Hazlovic. Hazlovic has a armbar, and you can go look at my Instagram, at Cage Minds MMA. There was a tap. Patrick, in a unmartial artist way, taps. The ref does not see it to break up the action, continues fighting, and wins a unanimous decision. Outside of the fact that he submitted in the first round, a great fight from Patrick, and another black eye on the officiating record of Mario Yamasaki. It was definitely Brazil against the world. as a split decision in controversial fashion goes in the favor of Sergio Moraes. It's laughable. It really is laughable to think that Moraes beat Tim Means by this decision. When you go back and look at the numbers, when you watch the fight, you look at the first round, and pretty much across the internet, across everything, we all seem pretty, steady and stagnant with that. Moraes won the first round, landed some big overhands, seen to back Means up. Means did have nearly a minute of top time in that first round with Moraes pulling guard, but did not get much work done on top. You go look at the official stats, a plus 14 in the striking column for Means. The big overhands from Moraes, we all thought he won that first round. The second round, Means backed off Moraes and had him covering up at least 2 to 3 times and backpedaling to the cage, hurting him with punches. In that round, you had a plus 13 on the striking for Means. There was no ground action. You had Means slipping punches, countering, shoulder rolling, blocking with his arms, not getting hit clean. The third round was the most dramatic and dominant for Means. A plus 20 in the strike metric, a 21 second of top control time with a knockdown, landed 3 big elbows from ground and pound, but we go to the judge's decision, and unspeakably somehow in Brazil, the Brazilian fighter somehow gets the victory. In all, Means outstrikes Moraes by 40 significant strikes. It's unbelievable how bad that judging decision was. 2 in a row for Means that he's lost now by split decision. Unbelievable how disrespectful the judges have been on effective jabs, on being able to slip with head movement, slip punches by the slightest of margins. And you think back to its technical boxing technique, and that's a lot of where these judges came from, was boxing, and that's what Means is utilizing, but the scoring is not working out. Winging big haymakers a la John Lineker, Robbie Lawler. Now Sergio Moraes once again seems to favor a fighter rather than clean technical striking. But as long as we can have consistency in what the judges are judging, then we're going to be okay. Best highlight, I thought, from the main card was the fight of the night between Anthony Smith, Thiago Santos. Santos landing that spinning heel kick in the first round of Smith. Smith eating it, searching for his takedowns, taking some abuse towards the end of the round. How was he able to withstand it? Could not withstand the body kicks, though, in the second round. A big finish for Santos, who wants a top 5, top 6 opponent in his next one. 4-fight win streak, all 4 by knockouts. 8 knockouts overall for Santos inside the octagon, tying Anderson Silva's middleweight record for most knockouts. Talking about controversial decisions, I talked about Tim Means and Sergio Moraes. We also have some controversy up at the main event, the 5-round main event, where you had the 39-year-old former world champion Lyoto Machida taking on the Alabama middle linebacker national championship award-winning alum, 30-year-old Eric Anders, who is undefeated at 10-0 at this point. The first round, Machida's leg kicks dominate the fight. He knocks down Anders with a leg kick, keeps leg kicking. A solid round for Machida. In the second round, you had a lot of Machida backing off, a lot of Machida running away, circling away from Anders. Anders stalking. Towards the end of the second round, a big explosion from Anders. Anders landed a straight left in the second round that hurt Machida, or at least presumably did from the way he ran away from it. You had a knee in the third round, busting Machida open between the eyes, a giant amount of blood coming down. You had Anders again in the third round, ending the round with a big explosion after trying to track down Machida. The fourth round was Anders' best round, where he is able to get a takedown, get some top time, get some control time, putting Machida on the cage, landing some big shots. The 5th round, Machida found his aggression in the last 30 seconds. Anders kept the pressure on for the majority of the fight. Machida, very good with his leg kicks, very good with his body kicks, racked up a lot of points. In all, when you get to the total strikes metrics, you have it 66 total strikes for Machida to 46 for Anders. We go to the judges, and it's a split decision for Lyoto Machida. The controversial part is controversial going up and down on Twitter. It seemed to be the majority of people thought Eryk Anders won this fight. You can live with the decision when you hear 48-47 Machida, 48-47 Anders. But then when you get to 49-46, I thought that was the giveaway that Anders had won, because I thought he did enough to win the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th rounds. But then it goes in favor of Machida, with the judge just giving Anders the 4th round, which was his cage control round. The round where he busted Machida open in the 3rd, that judge, Tony Weeks, did not even score that for Anders. He didn't score the big left hand in the 2nd round for Anders. I'm able to pick out these small significant moments from the rounds, thinking of why Anders won, because he did lose the accumulation of strikes, but the effective striking. That's what we're scoring off of, is effective striking. And Machida's leg kicks did land. There was some bruising to the right quadricep of Anders, to his lead leg. But nothing that ever stopped him from moving forward. Nothing that ever hampered his movement. We've seen Edson Barbosa, Jose Aldo, what effective leg kicks do. Effective striking. The body kicks. Nothing that Machida did backed down Eryk Anders. Anders kept moving forward. His strikes were so effective that every time he landed, it sent Machida flying or running away. They were so effective that Machida had a crimson mask after the fight. The cage control, obviously in the favor of Anders. I can live with the decision going in Machida's favor if you just watch the fight and examine it just as a 5-round fight. But on this night, at UFC Fight Night 125 in Brazil, we had already established in the Sergio Moraes Tim Means fight that the bigger shots are what the judges are looking for. We're looking for the damaging shots, the truly devastating or significant strikes. Machida's busted up. Machida is running away from Anders' attacks. Anders is consistently moving forward. That's why I believe he won and the fight was incorrectly judged. Accumulation of strikes does not matter. That's what you told us earlier. So when you look at Machida Anders, Moraes Means, what I'm looking for is where is the consistency in the judging? Is the guy winging the bigger shots that aren't landing the winner? If so, then Moraes is correctly the winner. Anders should be too. If we're talking about just who's touching in a technical aspect of watching a game of chess, you would have to say then that Machida's performance was closer in line with Tim Means in the scoring criteria. He landed the greater volume. He controlled who was landing the punches by his head movement. I had somebody on Twitter tell me that I didn't understand tactical fighting because how could I not see that Machida was winning? This is what I don't understand about the tacticalness of it and the people that are praising Machida. It takes two to tango. You can praise Machida for his movement, for his counter striking, but in doing so, you also have to praise Eryk Anders for his aggression, for his willingness to attempt to engage. But you have to dismiss Anders' fight IQ because he should not have tried to engage. It may have been boring, but it may have been the best strategy ever when guys like Patrick Cote just looked at Anderson Silva. When Tyrone Woodley backed himself up against the cage against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. You're praising Machida for being able to play his game. I'm saying that you need to denounce and kind of discourage Eric Anders and his team for not having the capacity of a game plan to not play Machida's game, to not pressure, run forward at him and give him the ability to, who's going to go first? Give him the ability to get on the inside. Give him the ability to, I know where you're doing. You're moving forward. That's what I can capitalize off of. That's what Stephen Wonderboy Thompson capitalized off of against Money Foes. And that's why Tyrone Woodley stood back against the cage and made the counter striker lead the dance. Joe Rogan has started to talk about that's how you fight Anderson Silva. It's how you fight great counter strikers. You have to either make it ugly, get in their face and shut down their space, or you have to make them become offensive. I would have loved to have seen Anders just stand his ground after a time in, not consistently charge at Machida. So the IQ behind the game plan for Eric Anders did him in, even though I again can make an argument for him winning off of landing the more significantly devastating strikes. From how can you tell what is devastating and what is significant? We're not actually having a meter strapped up to these guys, but I can tell you what's significant when the fighter lands and the other fighter is running, falling to the ground. In a perilous moment, it looked like the strikes that Anders was landing were damaging and effective to where Machida, yes, was scoring points, but nothing damaged, stopped, or deterred Anders from moving forward. A close split decision that I scored 48-47 for Anders and was totally not surprised at all when we went to the judge's decision and heard Lyoto Machida was victorious. The Dragon gets a hometown decision, literally in his hometown, and then more ridiculously than not, the mild-mannered martial artist calls out Michael Bisping and says that, "I'm coming for you, Michael Bisping." The funniest part about that is not for 24 minutes, Machida didn't take a step forward if he wasn't one step in front of Anders. He never stalk down his prey. He never went after. So to hear I'm coming after you, Michael Bisping, gives me quite the chuckle. Now, if you say, I challenge you to your retirement fight because we're both getting old, okay, we can work with that. But a more appropriate call out is, Michael Bisping, I call you out to meet you in the cage, where I'll appropriately maneuver myself around you till I look for the greatest counter-striking option. Don't know if that's the best-selling line, but it's a much more honest with himself Machida if he worded it that way. What would be next for Lyoto Machida? I'm not really quite sure. Michael Bisping is a possibility. Personally, I think I'd like to see Michael Bisping versus David Branch for Michael Bisping's last fight. A guy that Bisping isn't going to have to chase down to fight. Branch will stand in the pocket and trade, not be intimidated, and would be a game opponent. It's not that I believe Machida would be intimidated, but I believe, do we really want to watch Michael Bisping having to chase Lyoto Machida for his last performance in the octagon? Dave Branch would come forward, would bring the fight himself, and I think would make it much more of a fight. Talking about where do they go, Eric Anders still has a bright future. I still see big things. I don't have a name per se particular for Anders, but hanging in there for 25 minutes and landing the shots that he did on Machida, you still have to walk away feeling very positive about the future of Eric Anders. The middleweight division, you'd figure, would feel some impact from this night, but it came from a little bit further down the card, the fight of the night. Winner of that fight, Thiago Santos. I believe he will have the greatest impact going forward. We are on to UFC 221. Luke Rockhold, Yoel Romero. The winner will fight a now getting healthy Robert Whittaker for that UFC title. The other guys coming off of victories up in the top 10, you got Jacare, who just won in North Carolina, Chris Weidman getting ready to return, and Kelvin Gastelum. Depending on how ready Weidman is, you can make a Jacare Weidman fight. That sounds fun. Weidman's not ready. Okay, Jacare versus Gastelum. Thiago Santos, I believe, has earned himself a big fight, and you would jump him up there then to fight Weidman. I think that's how the middleweight division should shake out. Now, as I said, this weekend, you have UFC 221 coming up. Yoel Romero tires late. Phenomenal wrestling. Explosive athlete. Luke Rockhold, if his hands are down, he can get knocked out. We've had some, scary moments about his chin, but Rockhold is a game competitor, and I really do believe that Rockhold will come out victorious in this one, and we will be seeing a Luke Rockhold, Robert Whittaker fight for the UFC middleweight title. Mark Hunt, ageless one, taking on Curtis Blades in the co-main event. This is a big fight for Blades. Will he be able to raise to that level of such a veteran striker? An interesting one to see. Will Blades be able to use and lean on some of his wrestling background? Kicking off the pay-per-view card, Tyson Pedro looks to get back in the win column against tough Russian wrestler Samir Samarov. Obviously, Safarov is going to look to put Pedro on the cage. Jussier Formiga versus Ben 10 win is on the FS1 prelims. That is a big one in the 125-pound division. As Formiga has started to stumble, has never really reached the echelons of success that we've expected, and Ben 10 win is starting to talk about what he will have to do to make a charge towards a UFC title. Opening up the card on the UFC Fight Pass prelims, you have a couple fun ones that are going to be brawls in the welterweight division. He has a karate style. New Zealander Luke Jamo takes on Dachi Abi. Abi, who we saw in China, heavy-handed, accurate guy. These two are going to brawl it out. A chance for that bonus money early fight of the night competition. Same could be said for Jose Quinones and Teruto Ishihara. Ishihara with that big left hand. Quinones, little less experience. A tough, tested Mexican. And Ross Pearson versus Mizuto Hiroto. You have a trio of fights that look like brawls to me on the early prelims. One more to point out on the FS1 prelims. Damian Brown versus Don Young Kim Maestro. Maestro coming off of the quick knockout win over Takanori Gomi. Damian Brown, another tough, rugged guy who likes to get in there and throw his hands. Has lost back-to-back fights. It could be a huge coming out party for Maestro in that feature prelim spot. You have a pay-per-view this weekend. Forgot to mention also in the welterweight division on that pay-per-view card, Li Jingliang and his heavy hands taking on Jake Matthews, who's looking to fill out that welterweight body. Matthews likes to grind it out. If he can keep Leach on the ground, he should win this fight. But if not, he's going to get knocked out trying to get it there. And one more time, the interim middleweight title is on the line, and I expect Luke Rockhold to be calling out Robert Whittaker after this one is done. The UFC has had controversy. We're talking about conspiracy. There's pay-per-view price hikes. There's all kinds of crazy stuff going on in MMA. And I'm glad that you took the time out to listen to me rant about it. This has been Caged Minds Uncensored.